Mom always said life is precious. I didn't realize she meant her own. She passed last week, leaving only memories. I can still hear her voice in my dreams, but when I woke up, the pain was real and she was. I'm Lauren Mitchell, 40 years old, and if you were sitting across my kitchen table right now, you'd see the dent in the wood where she used to rest her coffee mug, the faint ring she always forgot to wipe up because she'd be too busy launching into a story about someone from church or the garden club or the lady in line at the post office who needed someone to talk to that day. I was a mom of two and a wife and a person who liked a quiet cup of coffee before the house woke up. But that week destroyed the rhythm I had thought would go on forever. The rhythm that started before sunrise, when I tiptoed down the hallway, careful not to step on the creaky board outside Tyler's room, boiled the kettle the way Mom taught me, slow and patient, and poured my coffee into the mug she gave me for my 30th birthday, the one with the crooked heart painted on it. That morning, the one when everything changed, the coffee went cold on the counter, untouched, because the phone rang while the kettle was still rattling, and it was Margaret from across the street from Mom's place, breathless and scared. "Lauren," she said, "you need to come. Your mom's at the community garden. She sat down and now she won't wake up." The way my name came out of her mouth told me this wasn't just dizziness or a fainting spell from not enough water, and I grabbed my keys and yelled to Eric upstairs, "It's Mom!" And then I was running out the door, my flip-flops slapping the porch steps like a child in a hurry, fumbling with the car door handle, my brain trying to catch up with my hands. Maple Ridge's morning commuter traffic looked the same as every other weekday. Cars inching down Main Street, a delivery truck double parked by the bakery, the same man in the orange vest holding the stop sign for the elementary school crossing. But the edges of the town seemed sharper, the colors too bright, like the world knew something and hadn't told me yet. At the intersection by the gas station, I nearly forgot to turn left toward the community garden because my hands wanted to go right, toward the school and the predictable line of minivans that formed around 2 o'clock every day. Mom marveled at that line the first time she picked up Tyler for me when June was sick, said it looked like a parade of patience. She loved that kind of choreography, the daily rituals that stitched people together without anyone noticing. When I pulled into the gravel lot, I saw a cluster of familiar faces. Margaret with the red dungarees she wore for gardening days, two men from the church I recognized but hadn't properly met, and Pastor Jim's wife with her hand over her mouth, eyes big and wet. And there, under the wooden arch with the carved words, "Maple Ridge Grows," my mother sat slumped on the bench she'd fought to have installed last summer, her head tilted against the post. Her sun hat slipping off one shoulder like a sleepy child. An ambulance sat crooked in the gravel with its back doors open. A paramedic was talking to Margaret, and another was kneeling beside Mom, two fingers pressed at her throat, the way you see on TV, but real life is quieter, and the birds didn't stop chirping because my mother's heart had. I remember the dust on my calves and the smell of damp dirt and tomatoes warmed by the early sun. I went to her and I didn't care that the paramedic looked up and said something about giving them space. I reached for her hand anyway, and it was still warm. "Mom," I said, and she opened her eyes just a little, enough to make a line in the air between us, and I caught it and didn't let go. "Life is precious," she rasped, almost making it a joke, the way she always did, a phrase she used when she burned her toast, and when she won a raffle at the church fundraiser, and when Dad died years ago, and she said it again, softer now, like it was a secret she wanted to make sure I knew. The paramedic's voice cut through the heavy air, something about her pulse, something about transport, and then the flurry of movement. Straps, a stiff white sheet, Margaret's hands on my shoulders, her breath warm with coffee, and the short ride to the hospital where the automatic doors whooshed open like a sigh and swallowed us up. The emergency room chairs were all a shade of blue that tried too hard to be calming. Eric found me there, put a hand on my back, and I realized I was shivering. I called Caleb, my younger brother, who was 3 states away on a job site because he could never stay in one place long, his voice cracking through the static as if the distance was inside of him, too. "I'll drive," he said, no hesitation, even though I knew it would take him all day. They took Mom into a room and asked me questions that didn't seem to matter. Her age, her medications, her medical history, And I answered because answering is what you do when people hand you a clipboard. It's a way to believe you can still control the narrative. They let us in. The bright lights made everything feel clean and unreal. I stood by her bed with the little machine beeping too rhythmically to feel real, like a sound effect, and I thought of the way she'd hold a tomato in her palm, weigh it, close her eyes, and say, "Give it another day," as if the fruit was a clock she could set. There wasn't another day to give her. It happened quickly and also slowly. Her breath lengthened, the room stretched, and I swear I smelled her hand lotion, the lemony one she kept by the sink, even though there were no lemons in that sterile room. I leaned in, pressed my cheek to her temple, and whispered that I loved her, that the kids loved her, that I would take care of her garden, her house, everything that mattered to her, and she said, "No regrets, Lolo," using the name she'd given me when I was little and the one she still used when she wanted me to remember who I had always been. And then the monitor's soundtrack changed, and the nurse touched my arm and said my name with the softness of someone who had said it too many times for too many families. Margaret had left, promising to water the hanging baskets at Mom's porch, because she knew that would be the first thing Mom would ask about if this had gone another way. The rest of the day happened like a montage I didn't want to be in. Phone calls to relatives who lived far away and didn't know what to say. A short conversation with Pastor Jim about arrangements and traditions, and whether we wanted the reception in the church basement or at Mom's house. Time-sensitive details that felt both obscene and necessary to discuss, while my mother's warmth was still in my hands. There were casseroles within hours, the green bean kind with crunchy onions on top, a baked ziti in a foil pan with a sticky note that said, "You are loved," a chicken noodle soup that tasted like someone's winters, and there were hugs in the parking lot of the hospital from people I'd known since I'd been a teenager at homecoming games, from people I knew because Mom knew everyone, and all of us temporarily belonged to the same cracked moment. We brought the kids home from school with careful words. Tyler tried to be tough. He always did, his jaw working like he was chewing on something that didn't have enough flavor. June climbed into my lap and asked if heaven smelled like Grandma's kitchen, which is the sort of question only an 8-year-old could ask without irony. We had to tell them that sometimes the world breaks in a way that can't be fixed with glue or patience or a good night's sleep. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my phone face down on the nightstand, the house hushed, the sound of the fridge clicking and the occasional car passing. I kept waiting for her daily text she sent every night before bed. "Sleep tight, my loves." And when it didn't come, the silence felt loud. The next morning, after the whirlwind of the hospital had receded into a quiet I hated, I went to Mom's house because I couldn't stand not being there. The house smelled like her in a way that my house never did, not because I didn't clean as well or cook the same recipes, but because the smell was layered with decades of her. Eucalyptus from her linen closet, onion and garlic from the cast iron pan she'd seasoned since I was in preschool, lavender sprigs she tucked into drawers. The morning sun painted the living room in the golden rectangles I had sat in with my homework spread across the coffee table when I was 12, and I could picture her in the kitchen, tying on her apron, turning on the radio to the morning show host she liked because he reminded her of her dad, humming along as she whisked pancake batter. I walked into the kitchen and could not move at first. The mug with the chip on the rim sat by the sink, the tea bag hanging out like a tongue. There was a list on the fridge with a magnet in the shape of a strawberry. Call the plumber about the slow drain. Bring lemon bars to the PTA bake sale on Friday. Pick up more soil from the nursery. I ran a finger down the list like it was Braille that could tell me what to do now. I opened the spice cabinet and inhaled, and that was enough to make the tears come like someone had unscrewed a cap. When I closed the cabinet, something caught at my eye. Tucked under the sugar canister was a corner of an envelope. I pulled it out, hands shaking. In her tidy cursive it said, "Start here, Lauren." My heart stuttered. I looked around like maybe she would step out from behind the pantry door and say, "Got you." But she didn't, and the little envelope felt heavier than paper should. Inside, a note on one of her old recipe cards, the back stained with something that looked like vanilla, said, "Life is precious because it is particular. That means the small things matter. If you're reading this, I am somewhere you can't follow yet. Do not rush. Make a list about lists. Then look under the left drawer of the buffet." Her sense of humor snuck in there. She loved making lists of lists. She taught me that when life felt too big, you broke it into small tasks, then into picture frames you could organize on a dining room table. I walked to the buffet in the dining room, the one that had been my grandmother, and pulled open the left drawer. It caught because it always caught, and I tugged it harder than necessary like a person who didn't want to cry at a drawer. Taped underneath, there was a small brass key and another note. This key opens the blue tin in the hall closet. Only open it when you have had something to eat and you have cried at least once today. Yes, I will know. I laughed then, because of course she would include a stipulation about eating. She never let anyone undertake anything big on an empty stomach. I went back into the kitchen, made myself some toast, the good multigrain she liked, smeared it with apricot jam that had the date she made it written in Sharpie on the lid, and I cried while I ate, tears dropping onto the plate, because it felt like such an ordinary thing, and ordinary was a scarce resource now. Then I stood in the hallway and stared at the closet door like something in there might jump out at me. I slid the door open and smelled old coats, winter boots, a whiff of cedar. On the top shelf, behind a hat box with a fake peony on the lid, there was a blue tin I didn't recognize, the kind that used to hold cookies at Christmas. The key fit. The lid came off with a little resistance, like it had stuck itself to the metal with memory. Inside, there were envelopes stacked neatly, each one labeled in her neat hand. When you can't sleep, when you are mad at me, when you think you can't do this, open after the first thunderstorm, open at the school pickup line, for Caleb, for the kids, and then one that just said, for later, which felt like the cruelest kind of hope. Underneath the letters, a small voice recorder, the old-fashioned kind with a flip cover, and a USB drive labeled in nail polish photos you forgot existed. My fingers hovered. I chose when you can't sleep, because I hadn't really slept, had I, and it felt honest. In the living room, I sat in her armchair, the one with the indented cushion from all the times she curled up with a book, and I opened the envelope. Her handwriting leaned just a little to the right, steady, but with pieces of her personality in the way she looped her Y's and crossed her T's. Lolo, it began. If it is night and the ceiling looks too blank and your chest has that heavy press of a freight train you didn't schedule, try these things. Make tea. Stand outside in your bare feet if it's not below freezing. Remember the night you were 4 and scared of the thunder and we counted between lightning and thunder, and I told you how far away the storm was and you were furious because you wanted it to be closer. You wanted to watch it from the porch, and every time the thunder came, you shouted, "Again!" You were not afraid of noise. You were made for weather. That is still true. Also, please remember that I have had a good life. I knew this day was coming a while back, longer than I told you. I didn't want to spend my last season talking about that part. I wanted to spend it watching June's little feet in those scuffed pink sneakers on the playground, and Tyler rolling his eyes at my knock-knock jokes, and you holding your coffee like a prayer. I did not hide it to hide. I hid it because it would have made you carry it, and I needed you to keep your hands free for the living. You can be mad at me. The letter for that is in here, too. I love you. I love you. I love you. Now go open a window and breathe. The page blurred, and when it came back into focus, the ink had bled a little at the edges where my thumb had rested, making the words look like they were fading and also like they were sinking deeper into the paper. A drop of my tears had smudged the dot on the eye of life, and it felt poetic and also unfair, the way everything did in those hours. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. Out in the hallway, a funeral home pamphlet Margaret had left sat on the console table like a necessary evil. I picked up my phone and texted Caleb, "There's a box of letters here." He called and his voice went small. "She knew," he said, as much to himself as to me. "She knew for a while, didn't she?" "She did," I said, staring at the envelope labeled for Caleb, and I pictured him driving on those long, straight roads he loved, the ones that made him feel like he could outrun decisions. We decided he'd be there by nightfall. "I'll help with the house," he said, which meant more than it sounded. Eric texted from work that he'd pick up the kids so I could sit with this, and I loved him fiercely in that moment for understanding that grief needed time and space, but also a ride to soccer practice at 6. The day stretched like cold taffy, and in the middle of it, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Peters from 3 doors down, a woman whose granddaughter had sat next to June in 1st grade, holding a casserole that weighed like a baby. "No onions," she said, as if that detail could keep a person anchored, and then she put a hand on my chin the way my own mother would sometimes do and said quietly, "Your mama carried this whole block for a long time. Let us carry you now." Later, after calls and lists and the surreal task of choosing a photo for the memorial program, we landed on one from last summer, her hair wild from the kayak and her face open and easy. I picked up the envelope labeled open at the school pickup line, purely out of curiosity, because who labels an envelope that way and expects it to be ignored? Mom, that's who. I tucked it into my bag without opening it, grabbed my keys, and headed to the line that made a gentle arc around Maple Ridge Elementary. The same line Mom joked made her feel like she was part of a modern dance routine. I idled behind a white SUV with a bumper sticker about rescue dogs and watched a pair of teenagers cut across the lawn, earbuds in, oblivious to adult eyes. And then the bell rang, and the floodgates opened, kids spilling out like popcorn. I pulled the envelope from my bag and slid a finger under the flap, feeling like I was breaking a spell. Inside, "Lolo, the pickup line is the most honest place in town. No one is their best self here. There will always be someone trying to double park, someone who forgot snack duty, someone with hair still wet because they chose sleep over blow drying. Be kind to all of them. Be kind to yourself. Remember when you were in 5th grade and I was late because I stopped to sign us up to serve at the shelter's Thanksgiving dinner, and you cried in the car and told me everyone else's moms had car snacks and braided hair, and you had a mom who forgot the cupcakes for the PTA meeting. You weren't wrong, but you weren't right either. We are all messy and precious, and nobody sees it in this line because we are all pretending. If you are reading this because I am gone, please look up when June walks out and memorize how her backpack bounces, and memorize the sound when Tyler says, "Can we go through the drive-thru?" Grief will try to steal these very small things, but they are where I will live for you. The line moved, and by the time June's ponytail bobbed into view, I had to take 3 deep breaths so my face wouldn't scare her. She climbed into the back seat, her voice already mid-story about how Mrs. Landry used gold stars to make a constellation on the board. And then Tyler came, taller than me almost, slid into the front seat, said, "Can we go through the drive-thru?" And his voice cracked on the through, a boy's voice still making room for the man's voice it would be. And I laughed because Mom had predicted it, and then I cried because she wasn't there to hear me tell her that. When we pulled into the driveway, I saw a note stuck to my front door in my neighbor Jenna's handwriting. "Dropped off cupcakes for tomorrow's bake sale. Your mom's lemon ones or my attempt at them. They might be more enthusiastic than accurate." That night, after the kids were in bed and Eric snored softly beside me, my phone buzzed on the nightstand with a text from an unknown number. "If you got this, it means I, the queen of timing, asked Margaret to send it. Don't be mad at her if you are mad at me. She doesn't follow orders well anyway. There's a small cassette recorder in the blue tin. Press play." It was my mother's voice in my pocket telling me to go into her house in the middle of the night to press play on something that might break me, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Eric stirred, and I whispered that I was going to Mom's, and he reached for my hand and squeezed. I drove in the dark because the dark can't make promises and therefore can't break any. The house creaked its familiar creaks as I let myself in. I sat at her table, pulled out the little recorder, and pressed the triangle like it was a button that could eject me back into a safer version of my life. Her voice filled the kitchen, not tinny like you'd expect, but cozy, as if she'd stuck it inside the bread box just so the acoustics would hug you. "Hi, Lolo," she said, and I closed my eyes. "If it is night, then you are probably doing that thing where you chew your cheek. Stop that. Okay. This is the part where I tell you something I didn't tell you. I knew my time was shorter for a while. I did not want to talk about doctors in the produce aisle or in between innings at Tyler's game. I didn't want the way you looked at me to change to that careful, polite look people give at funerals. I wanted to rip open one more bag of potting soil and make a mess. I chose to spend what I had on the things that made me happy, and that included keeping you from calculating the odds every time I coughed. I also chose not to do a treatment that would have taken me away from your real life for months when your life needed you in it. I went to June's recital instead. I went to the church picnic and humiliated myself at the 3-legged race. I held Margaret's hand after she had her second knee surgery. I ate too much bread. I'm not sorry for any of that. I paused the recording and stared at the pattern in the laminate on the table. There was a moment where anger rose, honest and hot, because how dare she decide alone? How dare she keep it from me? And the anger felt like loyalty dressed in spikes. I pressed play again because I didn't want to stop at that feeling. "If you are mad," her voice said, "write it down. Then burn it in a safe container outside because we don't need to tempt the fire department. If you are sad, cry until your face puffs up. If you are relieved that the waiting is over, do not be embarrassed by that." I felt it too. Grief is not neat. It is a yard sale. Some things find homes, some linger, some surprise you, some make you laugh. Remember when your father died and I bought that ridiculous clown painting at a yard sale because it made me smile? Let your grief be messy. Also, under the freezer there is a Ziploc with money for the neighborhood barbecue. Please do not let the barbecue die with me. That is not a metaphor. It is an actual party. People will show up and bring things you don't know what to do with. You will need more napkins than you think. I laughed, then sobbed, and then laughed again because of course she would leave barbecue money under the freezer. Who even knows how to look under a freezer? I crouched on the kitchen floor, careful of my knees, and found it tucked right where the toe kick was, taped to the underside like a squirrel stash, cash, and a note that said, "For food and for lights." Twinkle lights make everything gentler. The day of the memorial was one of those perfectly blue days that feels like weather mocking you. People came in their Sunday best and in jeans and in dresses they hadn't worn since their own mother's memorials, and the church smelled like coffee and old hymnals and faintly like the basement where they brewed. Pastor Jim spoke well. He had known Mom since he and his wife moved to Maple Ridge, and his voice went soft when he talked about how she would stay behind after services to wipe down tables because she couldn't stand sticky spots, and how she remembered every teenager's name even when they dyed their hair new colors. He talked about the garden, about how she'd coaxed vegetables out of stubborn clay and coaxed people into feeling like they were part of something. When it was my turn to speak, my legs were not interested in participating. I walked to the lectern because walking was the only thing that kept me from crumpling, and I looked at the faces of people who had eaten in our kitchen, who had sat on our porch, whose kids had played with mine in the sprinkler out front. "Mom always said life is precious," I started, and a hum moved through the room like a collective yes, and that buoyed me. I told them about the first time she made me drive on the highway, how she'd bribe me with drive-through hot chocolate if I could merge without white-knuckling the steering wheel. And I told them about the summer she decided to learn how to hula hoop because she wanted to be silly on purpose. And I told them about the letters, not their contents, but that they existed, because it felt important that people understood she had prepared to care for us in this way. She believed in small things, I said, hands shaking now, in the way a sandwich cut diagonally tastes better, in the way a short note tucked into a lunchbox can change the course of a day, in how a backyard light can make a person tell the truth. She believed life was precious not because it was perfect, but because it was particular. I looked at Caleb in the second pew, his shoulders hunched around his pain, and I said into the microphone, "She also used humor like a crowbar. So please tell stories that made you laugh, even if you feel like you shouldn't." Later, in the church basement, by the folding tables covered in tablecloths clipped with those little plastic clamps, people did tell stories. About how she taught a newly widowed neighbor to use a power drill, about how she made crackers and cheese taste like something from a restaurant, about how she always had Band-Aids in her purse, and once used them to keep a kid's shoe from falling apart at a soccer game. And then the weird part was over, and the harder part began. The part where you go home and the house is quieter than you remembered it being because you have been listening to your mom's voice in your head since you were born. Caleb slept on the pullout in the den, the first night kicking off the blanket because he ran hot, the second night pulling it up to his ears. On the third day after the memorial, we sat at Mom's dining room table, surrounded by boxes, because I had learned that grief was also sorting. We held onto the letters for a day or two, unopened, because we were gentle with ourselves in that small way. Caleb's letter to him was darker, more honest. He read it and then went out to the backyard and kicked a ball against the fence until the dog next door barked and barked, and then he came back inside calmer, and he hugged me, even though he wasn't a big hugger. "She knew me," he said simply, like it surprised him and also like it didn't. We disagreed about the house. I wanted to keep it for a while, let it breathe. He wanted to sell, finish the hard thing fast, put the money somewhere, move forward. "I can't be here every weekend," he said, and he wasn't wrong. "I can't not be here," I said, And I wasn't wrong either, though I could hear the way it sounded like I was holding onto a boat that had already drifted. The letter I opened that night, after we'd gone back and forth and got nowhere, was the one labeled, "When you are mad at me." It started with, "Okay, get it out." And then it gave me permission to say all the things I didn't want to say. The letter's second half said, "Now read this to your brother and tell him I wrote him a version, too." And then there was a recipe written underneath for cinnamon rolls, because she knew as well as anyone that you should never try to solve a family dispute hungry. We made them, the dough sticking to our fingers, flour on our shirts, Caleb laughing when I got cinnamon sugar on my nose, a brief truce kneaded into the bread. Over those rolls, warm and messy on small plates, we decided we'd keep the house through summer and host the barbecue. "It's what she ins," I started, and he said, "I know," and that was good enough. The next few days were a blend of old routines and new pains. I still sat in the pickup line. I still washed Tupperware. I still reminded Tyler to take his gym clothes out of his backpack because the smell could wage war. But there were also flashes of grief that knocked me sideways. In the cereal aisle at the grocery store, when I saw the brand she always bought because she liked the shape. At the post office when I realized I had to sign her name on a form not to get her packages anymore. At the little league field when June's friend's grandmother waved with that grandmother wave that is both exuberant and practical, and my chest heaved. People were kind. Some said the wrong things, but they said them because they didn't know what else to say. I kept the voice recorder with me like a talisman. I listened to a new message every few days, careful not to binge them like a show because I had this sense, as if I had been given just enough of her to stretch if I handled it right. One afternoon, while sitting in the church parking lot waiting for a committee meeting about the youth room that I agreed to attend because routine can be a raft, I listened to the message labeled, "Garden." "There's a corner by the fence," Mom's voice said, "where the soil is softer. That's where you should put the tomatoes. Not because they need it, but because it will make you feel like you're doing something right. Put basil near the door so you can smell it when you walk in. This is less about basil and more about feeling like a person again. You can always feel like a person if you are tasting something good. Also, check the birdhouse for the key to the shed. It is under a lopsided nail." I walked over afterward and found the key exactly where she said, my laugh bubbling up like a secret shared in math class. It felt like she was still mothering us, not from beyond in a spooky way, but from right there in the very particular things she touched. The first thunderstorm of the week rolled in on a Thursday night, the kind that starts slow, a long gray swath across the sky, then opens up in a rush. Tyler has always loved storms and June has always hated them, and both of them crawled into our bed like we used to crawl into hers when we were small. In the dark, June whispered, "Is Nana watching the rain too?" And I said, "I think she is the rain," surprised at my own answer because I'm not usually that poetic. The letter labeled "Open" after the first thunderstorm felt warm in my hands from the nervous energy I didn't know where to put. I opened it at the kitchen table with Eric beside me, his hand covering mine. "Well," he asked, and I said, "Give me a second," because looking down at the looping letters felt like the moments before salt hits boiling water. "Lolo," it said, "if it's storming, your electricity might go out, so if you didn't open this by a window, scoot over there now. Here is what I need you to know. The barbecue is less about food than you think. It is about making people stand next to each other and pass paper plates and laugh when the coleslaw blows off their forks because the wind picked up. It is about the neighbor's granddaughter telling you that she is going back to school and you saying, 'I knew you would.' It is about string lights because I like pretty things and life is allowed to be pretty even when it hurts. You'll find a deposit slip in my teapot. Call the number on it. It's a fund I've been saving for this event for years because I knew we'd need it, not just practically, but in the way people need something to look forward to when it seems like the air got sucked out of the world. Invite everyone. Invite the people you forgot to add to the Evite last year and pretend you meant to do that this time. Tell Caleb I have ideas about where the grill should go and then let him put it wherever he wants. The recipe for the peach cobbler is not so secret. It is sugar and peaches and patience. You always want to rush the peaches. Don't, let them sit. This is a metaphor and also a literal instruction. There was a deposit slip in the teapot, folded at an angle that made me smile. The fund she'd started was generous. It made me want to call her and say, "You are not subtle," which was true. The days leading up to the barbecue were a blur of errands, paper goods, a borrowed long folding table from the church basement, a grocery run that felt like a parade of summer, watermelon with tight green skins, ears of corn you had to peel back to inspect, fresh herbs, the good kind of ice that crunches right. The kids helped decorate mason jars with twine and little cloth squares June cut with a blunt pair of scissors that belonged to the house and didn't cut anything as well as you wanted them to. Jenna came over with a box of string lights, and her husband climbed the ladder and declared himself, fearless, but listen, you have to hold the ladder, and then promptly proved he was totally normal and a little afraid of heights. Caleb arrived with his truck loaded with grill equipment, and the two of us stood in the backyard where Mom had planted hydrangeas that looked like snowballs and argued amicably about where to set up the grill, until we agreed on a compromise that neither of us liked at first, and both of us liked after we stood there a minute imagining people forming a line and someone's kids cutting it on accident. The morning of, I woke up to the smell of my own coffee and the sound of Eric humming in the bathroom, and for a second, because it always happens like this, I forgot that Mom was gone, and then I remembered, and the remembering felt like a roundhouse kick to the gut. I put my hand flat on the cool counter, felt the steadiness there, and started in on the peach cobbler because it needed time, and I had to let it have it. The peaches were firm. I peeled and sliced, and then sprinkled sugar and a little cinnamon, and set them aside, not touching them, the way Mom's letter had asked me to, even though my inclination was to stir, to move, to fix. The house filled with the smell of butter and peaches, and something like warmth itself. People started arriving around 4, carrying bowls wrapped in foil and plates covered in plastic wrap, kids trailing behind like kites. The yard filled up in that way that makes you feel like your house is breathing. The string lights came on when the sun dropped, a soft glow that made faces look kinder. There was laughter, and the clink of ice in cups, and someone played a playlist that somehow got it right, old songs that made you remember your first dance, and newer ones the kids yelled the words to. Pastor Jim came with his granddaughter and a tray of deviled eggs that looked like art. Mrs. Peters cornered me by the lemonade and said, "Your mother would scold me for talking too much, so I'm going to hug you instead." And then did, and I let myself collapse for 3 seconds into that softness. There were moments of quiet, too, standing at the edge of the yard by the corner where Mom had layered compost like it was a religion, watching the fireflies spark up and down like the yard itself was speaking. Near the end, when the kids were sticky and the adults had that slightly glazed look of people who had eaten like it was their job, I tapped a spoon against a glass and asked for everyone's attention. "I have a gift from my mother," I said, and heard my voice wobble. Not her cobbler recipe because, let's be honest, that was just butter and fruits and patience, but something else. I held up the little recorder. She left some messages, and this one is for all of us, I think. I pressed play, and her voice floated out, as alive in that moment as a person can be without a body. "Hello, my loves," she said, and even those who had never been her loves felt the pull of that. "If you're hearing this, it means Lauren listened to me, which she does most of the time, and Caleb did not argue about the grill, which he does some of the time. Look around. These are your people. Eat that piece of cobbler even if you think you're full. Play one more round of cornhole. Tell the kid with the Band-Aid on his knee that he's faster than he thinks. Maggie, do not argue with me about whether you brought too much fruit salad. I can't fight you from here. Life is precious. Not because it is perfect, because it is particular. The day I learned that was a day like this. There was a breeze and someone laughed so hard lemonade came out their nose. I can't remember what we were laughing about. I only remember that it felt like nothing could touch us if we stayed together. Stay together. Take care of each other in the small ways. Be nosy about whether someone has eaten. Be insistently kind. Oh, and plant basil by the door. Okay, I love you, go eat." There was a hush when it ended, the kind of silence that happens when everyone remembers something at the same time, and then a murmur, and then people did exactly what she told them to do. They ate more, and they held each other's hands. After the party, when the yard was a constellation of paper cups, and the last kid had been carried to a car, dead weight with a sunburn on his nose, I stood by the grill with Caleb and looked up at the lights we'd strung. "You did good," he said, and I leaned my head on his shoulder the way I used to when we were kids watching fireworks from the same spot. The next morning, when the kids woke up and the house smelled like smoke from the grill and sugar from the cobbler, June asked if we could plant something for Nana. "A tree would be nice," she said in that serious tone she gets when she's making a plan, and Tyler nodded as if he had been thinking that, too. We called Margaret, and she came over with a shovel and a small maple sapling she said Mom had picked up from the nursery in early spring, but hadn't planted yet because she hadn't decided where. We chose a spot by the fence where the soil had been kind to the tomatoes. The sun was hot on my neck. The dirt was cool and soft. We dug. We were quiet the way people get quiet when they're doing something ceremonial without knowing how to say that's what it is. We patted the soil around the little tree. June tied a scrap of ribbon to the thin trunk. "So it knows it's ours," she said. That night, alone in my kitchen after everyone was asleep, I opened the envelope that I had been avoiding, the one that just said "for later," because it felt like it had teeth. Inside, a single page. It read, "Later can be a trap. There is no perfect time to break. There is no perfect time to heal. If you're reading this, it means you're brave enough to move forward even if your knees are shaking. It means you know that love doesn't end because the body does. It means you might remember to use the good plates on a Tuesday. It means you will let June make a mess in your kitchen and not sigh, and you will ask Tyler about the game even if the answer is 3 words and a grunt. It means you will call Caleb on a random Wednesday and ask what he had for lunch because your mother did that, and it was annoying and it was perfect. It means you will sit on your porch and wave at the neighbor walking his dog, and you will know that the waving is holy work. And yes, it means you will check under your freezer once a year because I might have left something else under there, but probably not. Go on, Lolo. Do the small things. They are the whole thing." I held that letter like I was holding a hand. The house made a noise like houses do, a settling sound, the hum of the fridge, a car 2 blocks over, the dog next door sighing. It was strange to realize I felt okay at the same time as I felt not okay, that they could both exist, like 2 tracks on the same song. Over the next weeks, I noticed a shift in the way I moved through the world. It wasn't big. It was particular. At the grocery store, I let someone with 2 items go ahead of me even though I was in a rush. At the little league field, when a ball soared, I didn't look down at my phone. At church, I wiped a table without being asked and without rolling my eyes. I found myself asking a girl at the end of our street if she wanted to ride along to the library because I remembered being 14 and wanting to be asked to be part of someone's errands. I started putting my phone on airplane mode at the school pickup line and watching the kids spill out and trying to memorize backs of heads, the sharp way they move when they know who is there for them. I also messed up. I snapped at Eric for loading the dishwasher. Wrong. And I forgot to pay for a field trip form until the last minute. And I burnt a pan of roasted carrots because I was listening to a voicemail of Mom telling a story about the time I cut my own bangs and cried the whole first day of 4th grade. And she had to stand in the school bathroom with scissors trying to make it look intentional. Grief made me tender and also thin-skinned, and both were true and both were okay. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old photos in Mom's attic, I found a sealed envelope addressed to the day you feel guilty. That envelope had not been in the blue tin, which somehow made it feel even more like a trick from a magician who knew her audience too well. Inside, one line, "Guilt is a liar in a nice dress." I laughed out loud, alone in the dust, and then I sobbed because my mother had the nerve to call me out from beyond the reach of my scolding. I taped it inside a kitchen cabinet, where you might put a recipe or an emergency number, and I looked at it every time I thought I should have done something different, should have read a letter sooner, should have made more cookies for the funeral, should have told her I was coming over that one Tuesday when I went to a dentist appointment instead. Life returned in fits and starts. The PTA needed someone to run the fall bake sale, and I said yes before the part of me that says no could answer. I baked her lemon bars, and they were almost as good as hers, which is to say they were good but missing that thing that always tasted like her. A new neighbor moved in 2 houses over, and I made a casserole and waved across the walkway, and when she didn't wave back right away, I didn't decide she was rude. I decided she was overwhelmed. I called Caleb more. He didn't always pick up, but when he did, we talked about nothing and everything. A new socket wrench he liked, the weather where he was, a song we both heard at the same time on the radio in different states. One night, sitting on the front step sipping tea, I pulled up the last message on the recorder, the one I had been saving because I was afraid of it ending, the one labeled, "Good night." "Lolo," it said. "If you're listening to this, it means you have let me go and not let me go. Both are necessary. It means you have learned to sleep again or at least to rest your body while your brain practices the idea. It means you have gotten through a Tuesday that felt like a mountain. Good. I am proud of you. You are made of the same stubborn kindness that I was, and that is a good thing to be. If you can, go out to the porch and look at the sky for a minute. It changes every night, and yet you can count on it always changing. That's what I want for you. Be new and be dependable. Be fun and do the taxes. Take care of your body. Kiss Eric the first time you see him in the kitchen in the morning, even if you have coffee breath. Tell the kids I said to be nice to their teachers and to the kid who sits alone at lunch. And when the maple tree gets big enough, hang a swing there. Even if no one uses it for long, the idea of it is enough sometimes. Okay. Good night, my love. Good night. I stayed on the porch long after the message ended, long after the tea went cold, long after the streetlight flicked on. The maple tree was just a stick with leaves, but I could see it. The swing, the afternoon light, June pumping her legs, Tyler pretending he was too old and then caving and taking a turn. I could see the barbecue next summer and the one after that, string lights sagging a little but still holding. I could see myself at 60, making coffee and telling some younger version of me that life is precious, not because it always felt kind, but because it always felt particular and that my job was to notice. The other day at the school pickup line, I saw a mom with wet hair and no snacks, and I smiled and handed her one of ours. She laughed and took it and said, "You're a lifesaver." And I said, "It's a village." And we both rolled our eyes because that phrase gets overused, but we both meant it. I still have days where the hurt is new. I found a voicemail from her last night I hadn't played yet, a mundane one where she said she had an extra loaf of bread if we wanted it, and my stomach clenched because even the ordinary feels different now. I saved it. I saved it not because I can't move on, but because moving on doesn't mean letting go of the sound of your mother offering you bread. I'm not the same woman I was 2 weeks ago, and that's okay. I'm 40 and I have a mother who taught me how to make a bed tight and a life loose, and those two skills have never failed me. The house still feels different without her in it. Our town does too, like a chorus missing its alto. But in the spaces, other voices rise. People step closer. The maple tree grows. Somewhere, a letter waits under a freezer for another day, but for now, I am here. I am in the school pickup line, in the grocery aisle, on the bleachers at a little league game, on the church committee arguing about paint colors, at the neighbor's barbecue holding a paper plate with a smear of sauce, waking early to make coffee, kissing my husband, pulling my kids close when they'll let me and letting them pull away when they need to. Life is precious. She meant her own, and she meant mine, and she meant the lives around us that get braided together when we pass napkins and share peaches that have finally softened from waiting. If you stayed with me through this, thank you. If my mother's story made you think of someone you need to call or a letter you need to write or a recipe you need to try again, do it today. And if you want to hear more family stories like this, tap like and subscribe and tell me, what would you have done if you found that blue tin?